Have you ever loved someone so much that you gave them every part of yourself, only to realize one day that they never valued it? That no matter how much effort you put into the relationship, you were nothing more than a convenient background character in their life. That was Daniel's reality. A man who believed in loyalty, patience, and love, married to a woman who treated those very things like disposable luxuries. Daniel and Vanessa had been married for 6 years. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple. He was a dependable man with a steady career in finance, known for his calm nature and quiet strength. Vanessa was lively, social, and beautiful, the type of woman who lit up the room with her presence. But behind closed doors, their marriage was far from ideal. In the early years, Daniel had overlooked the small things. Vanessa's sarcasm when he tried to help, the way she rolled her eyes when he suggested spending time together, the weekends she claimed she needed for girls' trips. He told himself it was just her personality, that she was more carefree, more independent, more outgoing. But over time, those little things stopped feeling harmless. They began to feel like cracks. Daniel wasn't a perfect man, but he tried. He cooked dinners when she came home late. He left notes on the fridge reminding her to eat breakfast. He planned anniversaries she often brushed off as not a big deal. He listened to her frustrations about work, even when she never asked about his. He believed marriage was about effort, showing up for each other even when it wasn't convenient. But for Vanessa, the effort was something optional. She was always surrounded by her circle of friends, especially her male best friends, whom she insisted were just like brothers. Daniel tried not to feel insecure, but when she spent entire weekends away, laughing and drinking with them, he couldn't help but wonder why his presence wasn't enough. When he expressed his feelings, Vanessa's responses were dismissive. Daniel, you are too sensitive. Stop acting like my father. I need my freedom. Don't be so insecure. They are just friends. Every word chipped away at him. Still, he stayed quiet because he loved her more than his pride. Their marriage became a cycle. Daniel trying to hold things together, Vanessa pulling further away. Nights when she stayed out late without explanation. Days when she criticized him for being boring, while he planned quiet evenings at home. Daniel convinced himself that if he just kept giving, she would eventually realize his worth. But deep down, he was exhausted. What Daniel didn't know was that life had a cruel way of balancing itself. That one that when one person takes love for granted, they risk losing it forever. And soon, a woman named Sophie, a colleague with warmth in her smile and kindness in her voice, would show Daniel what it felt like to be truly seen. And from that moment on, nothing in his marriage with Vanessa would ever be the same. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Daniel woke up alone. The bed beside him was cold. Vanessa had gone out the night before with her friends and hadn't returned until early dawn. He hadn't even heard her come in. He padded into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table staring at his phone. He thought about calling her, asking where she was, but he knew how that conversation would go. She would laugh it off. You worry too much. You're acting like my keeper. Or worse, she would accuse him of being controlling. So, He said nothing. He just drank his coffee in silence, the loneliness settling in like a heavy blanket. Vanessa lived in her own rhythm. She worked a demanding job in marketing, but weekends were for her escape. Bars, late night drives, and impromptu trips with her friends, mostly men. Daniel was rarely invited, and when he asked to join, she would brush it off. It's just not your scene, babe. You wouldn't have fun. Daniel wanted to believe her, but as the weekends stacked up, he started to feel like his wife's life didn't have space for him anymore. It wasn't just the weekends, it was the small things too. When Daniel cooked dinner after work, she would yield while scrolling on her phone, barely acknowledging him. When he shared good news about a project at work, she would nod, then change the subject to her colleagues or her latest night out. When he tried to plan a gateway for their anniversary, she cancelled last minute because something came up. Every dismissal stung, but the worst part was her words. It was the indifference behind them. At night, Daniel lay awake replaying their years together. He asked himself questions that had no answers. Was he not exciting enough? Had he done something wrong? Was love supposed to feel this one sided? But even when his heart felt heavy, he told himself he couldn't give up. Marriage, he believed, was about patience, about weathering storms, about standing firm even when the other person wavered. So, he kept trying. One Friday evening, Daniel decided to make an effort. He left work early, cooked Vanessa's favorite meal, pasta with white wine sauce, and set the table with candles. When she walked in, he greeted her with a hopeful smile. Surprise! Vanessa looked at the table, then at him. Daniel, I already ate. We grabbed food after work. He felt his chest tighten. I thought we could spend some time together, just us. She sighed. Why do you always make a big deal out of everything? I'm tired. I just want to shower and sleep. And with that, she walked past him, leaving the dinner untouched. Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring at the candles flickering against the untouched plates. That night, he ate alone. It wasn't just emotional neglect. Physical intimacy between them had faded too. Vanessa always seemed too tired or not in the mood. When Daniel reached for her, she pulled away gently but firmly. Over time, he stopped trying. Daniel wasn't blind. He saw the way Vanessa lit up when her phone buzzed with messages from her friends. He noticed how she dressed up for night outs, while at home she barely looked this way. He wanted to believe she was faithful. He had no proof otherwise. But even if she wasn't cheating physically, she was gone in every other way. And Daniel was left clutching a marriage that was crumbling in his hands. At work, Daniel found solace in small things: a laugh shared over coffee breaks, a kind word when deadlines piled up. Sophie wasn't someone he thought of that way, not at first. But slowly, without realizing it, Daniel began to look forward to the moments when she would stop by his desk, ask how he was doing, and actually listen. It was in stark contrast to the silence waiting for him at home. It began innocently. Sophie wasn't a new face at the office. but Daniel had never really spoken to her beyond polite greetings. She worked in a different department, yet somehow, in recent months, their paths began to cross more often. Shared projects, late meetings, and coffee breaks in the pantry. Sophie was bright, empathetic, and had a way of making people feel heard. The first time she really asked Daniel, "How are you doing?" and actually paused for an answer, he almost didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being asked anymore. Not really. Their talks began casually: work updates, complaints about deadlines, little jokes about office clerks. But soon, Daniel found himself opening up about more. One late evening, as they both stayed back to finish reports, Sophie noticed the weariness in his face. "You look drained," she said softly. "Yeah," Daniel replied with a half smile. "Long week." "Work or life?" she asked, tilting her head in a way that showed genuine curiosity. Something about her tone cracked the dam. Before he knew it, Daniel was sharing pieces of his life he hadn't voiced to anyone: the loneliness at home, the feeling of being invisible, the quiet ache of trying and falling to hold a marriage together. Sophie listened. She didn't judge, didn't interrupt, didn't offer cliches. She just nodded and occasionally said, "That must be hard." It was the validation Daniel didn't know he was starving for. Daniel never intended to compare Sophie to Vanessa, but the contrast was impossible to ignore. When Daniel spoke, Sophie leaned in, attentive. When he laughed, she laughed too, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely found joy in it. When he expressed doubts about himself, she reassured him without dismissing his feelings. Every little exchange with Sophie highlighted the void at home. One afternoon, Sophie suggested they grab lunch outside the office. They sat at a quiet cafe nearby, sunlight spilling across the table. For the first time in months, Daniel felt light. They talked about books, childhood memories, and even silly dreams, like Sophie's wish to someday own a little bakery at the coast. At one point, Daniel caught himself smiling so widely it startled him. He hadn't realized how rare that had become. When Sophie excused herself to take a call, Daniel stared at his reflection at the cafe window. His smile faded into something heavier. What was he doing? Why did it feel like he was betraying his vows just by enjoying her company? And yet, wasn't it worse that his wife hadn't made him feel seen years? From then on, Daniel began to seek out Sophie's presence more. Not deliberately at first, but with subtle anticipation. Coffee breaks weren't just about caffeine, they were about the chance to hear her laugh. Meetings were not just about work, they were about catching her glance across the table. He began to confide in her regularly. She became his sounding board, his cheerleader, his quiet refuge. And Sophie, though careful, didn't pull away. She seemed to sense his loneliness, and she met it with warmth. At home, Vanessa remained oblivious, or perhaps she didn't care enough to notice. She still spent weekends away, still brushed off Daniel's attempts to connect, still laughed harder at texts from her friends than she never did at his words. If she sensed his growing distance, she gave no sign. One evening, after a particularly rough argument with Vanessa, when she had mocked him for nagging, when he had asked her to come home earlier on weekdays, Daniel found himself texting Sophie. Not about work, not about schedules, just rough night, can't sleep. She replied almost instantly, want to talk? They ended up on the phone for nearly 2 hours, voices low in the quiet of the night. Daniel laughed more in those 2 hours than he had in months. When he finally hung up, the guilt hit him hard. He turned to look at the empty side of the bed where Vanessa should have been sleeping, but she was out again. Daniel lay there in the dark, torn between shame and relief. He knew something had shifted, something he couldn't take back. It wasn't love yet, it wasn't an affair, but it was the start of a dangerous emotional bond, one that filled the cracks Vanessa had left wide open. And Daniel, though he told himself he was still committed to his marriage, couldn't deny it anymore. Sophie made him feel alive. Weekends had once been sacred for Daniel and Vanessa. Saturday mornings meant late breakfasts, strolling through the farmer's market, and lazy afternoons watching movies. But those rituals had disappeared. Now, weekends belonged to Vanessa's crew. She had three close male friends, Liam, Jordan, and Ethan, men she insisted were just like brothers to her. Daniel had them met a few times. They were charming, quick witted, and clearly enjoyed Vanessa's company. But every time she laughed at their jokes with that unrestrained sparkle in her eyes, Daniel couldn't help noticing. It was a kind of laughter he hadn't heard directed at him in years. Don't wait up, Vanessa would text on Friday nights. Or, going on a weekend trip with the guys, back Sunday evening. Or, you are too uptight, Daniel. These are just friends. Don't make everything into a drama. She spoke as if his unease was the problem, not her absence. Daniel never asked her not to have friends. But wasn't marriage about balance, about boundaries, about respecting each other's comfort? Every time he tried to bring it up, she would brush him off. You are paranoid. You are overthinking. Stop being controlling. The more Vanessa dismissed him, the more Daniel's frustration grew. He didn't want to be the jealous husband. He wanted to trust her. But trust wasn't blind, it was built on reassurance, on mutual respect. And Vanessa wasn't giving him any of that. One evening, after she returned late from yet another dinner with friends, Daniel finally confronted her. Do you even realize how this looks, Vanessa? His voice cracked with suppressed anger. She sighed, rolling her eyes. Daniel, not this again. I told you, they are just friends. You spend more time with them than you do with me, he pressed. Well, maybe because they are fun, she snapped. The words hit him harder than she realized. After that, something shifted in Daniel. He stopped bringing it up, not because it didn't hurt, but because he knew the conversation would go nowhere. Instead, he turned inward. He poured himself into work, and without meaning to, He leaned more on Sophie. She became his safe space, the person he turned to when the silence at home grew unbearable. Vanessa noticed his growing detachment, but she misread it as sulking. She told herself he would get over it, the way he always did. But this time, he wasn't just retreating, he was quietly building walls she wouldn't be able to tear down. The irony was that Vanessa wasn't malicious. She didn't set out to hurt Daniel. In her mind, she was just living her life. She believed that because she wasn't physically unfaithful, she wasn't crossing any lines. But what she didn't see, or refused to see, was that emotional neglect can be just as destructive as betrayal. Every laugh with her friends, every weekend away, every dismissive remark about Daniel's feelings was a wedge driven deeper into their marriage. And by the time she realized it, the damage would already be done. One Sunday evening, after Vanessa returned from yet another weekend trip, Daniel sat at the kitchen table waiting for her. His phone buzzed, a message from Sophie checking in if he was okay. He didn't reply. Vanessa dropped her bag by the door and looked at him. "What's with the face?" she asked. "Nothing," Daniel said quietly. "Good, because I'm exhausted." She brushed past him into the bedroom. He sat there for a long time, staring at the unopened message from Sophie. The ache in his chest was no longer just loneliness. It was the dawning realization that his wife didn't even see him anymore, and that, perhaps, he no longer wanted to fight to be seen. Daniel never intended to betray his marriage. Even as the charm between him and Vanessa widened, some part of him clung to the vows he had made. But loyalty without reciprocity is like watering a plant in barren soil. It withers no matter how much you give. Sophie didn't demand his heart. She didn't lure him with promises. All she did was listen, laugh, and remind him he was still worth someone's attention. And that was all it took. It began with harmless chats after work, then late night texts, then phone calls that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Daniel would lie in bed, phone in hand, his face lit by the glow of Sophie's messages while Vanessa scrolled through her own feeds, oblivious beside him. One night, after an especially bad argument with Vanessa, Daniel texted Sophie, "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." Her reply was immediate: "You don't have to go through it alone." Those words became an anchor. For the first time, Daniel felt like someone was truly on his side. The first time Daniel and Sophie hugged outside of work, it was after a particularly grueling day. He had confided in her, raw and unfiltered, about how unseen he felt at home. She listened, her eyes soft, and when words failed, she stepped forward and embraced him. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't reckless, it was tender, healing. But Daniel knew it was more than it should have been, and yet he didn't let go. From that day, the air between them carried an unspoken truth. Neither dared to name. Meanwhile, Vanessa's carefree rhythm began to falter. One Saturday morning, she woke to find Daniel already dressed, sipping coffee at the table instead of waiting in bed like he usually did. Heading out early? She asked. Yeah, just some errands, he said without looking up. Something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't sulking anymore. He wasn't pleading or complaining. He was distant. For the first time, she felt a flicker of unease. Later that week, she noticed him smiling at his phone, a softness in his expression she hadn't seen directed at her in years. When she asked who he was texting, Daniel replied casually, just Sophie from work, project stuff. The name stuck in her mind. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa began to notice little things. The way Daniel lingered at the office longer than before, the rare but unmistakable happiness that surfaced after certain messages, the subtle shift in his energy when she brushed him off, as if her dismissiveness no longer wounded him the way it once had. At first, she told herself she was imagining it, but the doubt dawned at her. One evening, as Daniel showered, Vanessa glanced at his phone, left charging on the nightstand. She didn't want to be that wife, but curiosity burned. When a message notification from Sophie lit up the screen, made it home safe. Thanks for listening tonight. Her stomach sank. Vanessa sat frozen, phone still in her hand. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was stunned, because for the first time, she realized the obvious. Her husband had found in someone else what he had begged for her all along. And it wasn't Sophie who had stolen him. It was her own neglect that pushed him away. That night, Vanessa lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about every argument, every dismissive laugh, every weekend she had chosen her friends over her husband. And she saw, with a clarity that cut deep, that the man she once loved slipping from her grasp. And for the first time in years, Vanessa felt fear, not of losing control, but of losing Daniel. She resolved that things had to change. She had to change. But as she turned toward him, watching him sleep peacefully for once, another realization dawned at her. What if it was already too late? Vanessa had always been bold, outspoken, and unapologetic. But the night she saw Sophie's messages, something cracked within her. For years, she had dismissed Daniel's pleas for attention, brushing them off as neediness. Now, staring at the screen, she saw the truth. Someone else had given him what she refused to. The next morning, Daniel expected the usual routine. Vanessa scrolling through her phone, half listening to his attempts at small talk. Instead, he was startled to find breakfast waiting on the table. Made your favorite, Vanessa said with an awkward smile. Daniel blinked. Pancakes with strawberries. She hadn't cooked for him in months. In the days that followed, Vanessa seemed transformed. She began coming home earlier. She suggested movie nights. She even cancelled a weekend trip with her male friends, claiming she just wanted some us time. At first, Daniel was cautious. Was this genuine remorse or just guilt driven panic? Why the sudden change? He asked one evening. Vanessa hesitated before answering. Because I think I have been blind, and I don't want to lose you, Daniel. Her voice cracked on the last words. It was the first time in years she had admitted fear of losing him. For Daniel, her efforts stirred something complex. On one hand, he had longed for this version of Vanessa, the one who cared, who tried, who looked at him with tenderness. On the other hand, it hurt that it took another woman's presence to wake her up. Why did it take losing him to make her see his worth? He played along with her gestures, but deep inside, the walls he had built remained firm. Sophie's laughter still echoed in his mind. Sophie's compassion still lingered in his heart. And compared to that, Vanessa's sudden affection felt a little too late. One night, Vanessa sat beside him on the couch, her hands slipping into his. Daniel, I know I have made mistakes, she whispered. I know I have been selfish, but please, give me another chance to make this right. Daniel looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw desperation in her eyes. He knew she meant it. He knew she wanted to fix what she had broken. But he also knew something she didn't. You cannot resurrect love that has already been buried under years of neglect. As weeks went by, Vanessa doubled her efforts. Dinners, date nights, heartfelt apologies. She even suggested couples therapy, something she would have mocked in the past. But Daniel couldn't bring himself to meet her halfway. He went through the motions, smiling when required, responding politely, but his heart wasn't there. Every attempt Vanessa made reminded him of what could be, but of how long he had begged for these, and how long she had ignored him. One evening, after Vanessa had planned a surprise dinner at home, Daniel finally voiced the truth. Vanessa, he said quietly, I see you are trying. I respect that. But I cannot forget how long I was alone in this marriage. Her eyes widened. But I am here now. I am trying now. Daniel shook his head. Yes, now. But where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I begged you for your time, your respect, your love? Vanessa's lip trembled. I thought you would always be there. I thought you would never leave. And that, Daniel realized, was the root of it all. She had taken him for granted, believing his devotion was unbreakable. That night, Vanessa wept quietly beside him. For the first time, she was the one afraid of abandonment. But Daniel knew something she didn't sometimes. Sometimes love doesn't end with anger. Sometimes it dies quietly, replaced by indifference. And once it's gone, no amount of effort can bring it back. Daniel found himself standing at a crossroads, pulled between two contrasting worlds. On one side was Vanessa, suddenly eager to be the wife he had always wanted, cooking dinners, asking about his day, even suggesting vacations together. On the other side was Sophie, who hadn't changed a thing, yet continued to offer him a space of honesty, warmth, and effortless connection. With Vanessa, everything now felt staged, performed, as though she were desperately trying to rewind time. With Sophie, everything was unforced. A simple smile from her felt more genuine than an entire weekend of Vanessa's renewed attention. Daniel wrestled with guilt. He hadn't crossed a physical line with Sophie, but emotionally, he was tethered to her in ways he couldn't deny. Part of him whispered that if he were a good husband, he would cut Sophie off completely and give Vanessa the chance she was begging for. But another part, the louder, truer part, asked, why should loyalty bind me to a woman who only started valuing me when she realized I might leave? Vanessa sensed the shift. Even if she didn't admit it out loud, she noticed the way Daniel's eyes didn't soften when she touched him. She noticed how he pulled away slightly when she leaned in for affection. One night, she staged what she thought would be a breakthrough. She lit candles, prepared his favorite dinner, and played their old wedding song in the background. When Daniel arrived home, she greeted him with a trembling smile. Do you remember this song? She asked. Daniel nodded, setting down his briefcase. Of course. She stepped closer. Then dance with me. Reluctantly, Daniel placed his hands on her waist. She wrapped her arms around him, her head resting on his chest. For a moment, they swayed in silence. But as Vanessa closed her eyes, imagining reconciliation, Daniel's mind drifted elsewhere. He thought of Sophie, her laugh, her gentleness, the way she made him feel seen without asking for anything in return. The contrast was unbearable. Later that evening, as the candles burned low, Vanessa whispered, Daniel, we can fix this. I know we can. Just tell me what I need to do. Daniel looked at her, his eyes tired. Vanessa, that's the problem. You are asking now, after years of me telling you exactly what I needed: respect, time, partnership. And you laughed at me, dismissed me, chose everything else over me. Her face crumpled. But I have changed. I'm here now. Daniel shook his head slowly. Yes, but my heart isn't. You waited until I was empty, and now there's nothing left to give. Vanessa broke down, tears streaming as she clung to him. Don't say that, please, Daniel. Don't give up on us. But Daniel's silence was louder than any words. He didn't push her away, but he didn't hold her tightly either. And in that silence, Vanessa finally understood. She had lost him, not to Sophie, not to circumstance, but to her own neglect. That night, as Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling, he finally admitted what he had known for months. This marriage was over. Not because he hadn't tried, but because Vanessa had only started trying when his love had already bled dry. It was the moment of clarity he had both dreaded and craved. The decision was no longer if, but when. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. Daniel woke the next morning with an eerie calmness. Vanessa was still asleep beside him, curled toward his side as though clinging to a version of him she feared was slipping away. He stared at the ceiling, the soft hum of the city outside reminding him of one undeniable truth. He had already left her in his heart. His body was still there, his voice was technically intact, but his spirit, the part that once begged for her attention, was gone. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to try harder. At work, Daniel sat at his desk long after the office had emptied, his laptop screen glowing with an untouched spreadsheet. He wasn't thinking about numbers, he was thinking about what life might look like without Vanessa. Lonely? Perhaps. Messy? Certainly. But also, honestly, it would be free. Sophie passed by his office and gave him a small wave. He smiled faintly but didn't invite her in. This wasn't about her, not right now. This was about facing his own truth. He pulled out his phone and opened a blank note. The title: Reasons to Stay versus Reasons to Leave. In the stay, he wrote: History, the kids we planned but never had, she is trying now. Under leave, he wrote: Years of disrespect, loneliness in marriage, emotional neglect, only valued once she feels threatened. I deserve more. The leave list was longer, clearer, undeniable. That evening, Daniel came home to find Vanessa buzzing with forced cheerfulness. She had cooked again, another candlelight dinner. Look, she said eagerly, I'm trying. I really am. Daniel nodded, but didn't sit. Instead, he placed his briefcase down and looked her in the eyes. Vanessa, we need to talk. Her smile faltered. That sounds serious. It is, he exhaled. I can't do this anymore. Her face drained of color. What do you mean? I mean this marriage. I have given everything I could, Vanessa. For years I begged for your time, your respect, your partnership. You brushed me off. You made me feel like I was a burden in my own home. Her hands trembled as she gripped the back of a chair. But I am changing. You see that, don't you? Please, Daniel, don't throw us away. His voice was steady, almost too calm. That's just it. You only started to care when you realized you might lose me. You are fighting now, but where was this fight when I was drowning? When I needed you the most? Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came. I don't hate you, Daniel continued. I will never hate you, but I cannot spend another year, another day pretending this is enough. I deserve more, and deep down, you know I'm right. Vanessa broke then, sobbing as she begged him to reconsider. She promised counseling, more effort, a new beginning. She clutched his arm, trying to tether him to the life she suddenly realized she had taken for granted. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He didn't crumble. Instead, he quietly said, "I'll be contacting a lawyer." The words struck her harder than any argument could have. That night, Daniel packed a small bag. Not everything, just enough to leave for a few days while he figured out the logistics. As he zipped it shut, Vanessa sat on the bed, red eyed and trembling. "Please, Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me." He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. Without turning, he said softly, "I already did, Vanessa, a long time ago." Then he stepped out into the night, the weight of finality pressing down on him, but also lifting something heavy from his chest. For the first time in years, Daniel could breathe. The silence in the house was unbearable. Vanessa sat in the living room, the untouched dinner from the night before still sitting on the table. She hadn't bothered to clean it up. Every corner of the house felt haunted by Daniel's absence. His toothbrush missing from the bathroom, his side of the closet barely, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the hallway. For the first time in years, Vanessa realized what she had truly lost. Not a provider, not a roommate, but a man who had loved her with the depth she hadn't deserved. Daniel checked into a small serviced apartment across town. It wasn't much: white walls, a modest couch, a tiny balcony, but it was peaceful. No arguments, no waiting alone for someone who never came home. That night, he lay on the bed and simply listened to the quiet. It wasn't the silence of neglect anymore, it was the silence of freedom. Still, there was pain. Divorce wasn't victory, it was loss. But at least this time, the loss felt honest. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat across from a divorce lawyer. The papers felt heavy in his hands, but he signed them anyway. "Are you sure about this?" the lawyer asked. Daniel nodded. "More sure than I have been about anything in years." Vanessa received the papers a few days later. She broke down when she opened them, her tears staining the legal documents. She had never imagined it would come to this. One evening, Vanessa showed up outside Daniel's apartment. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen. "Daniel, please," she whispered when he opened the door. "I will go to counseling. I will quit the weekend trips. I'll cut back on time with my friends. Just don't end us." Daniel looked at her, his heart heavy. "Vanessa, you should have done all of that years ago. Not because I threatened to leave, but because you wanted me, because you valued us." She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "but I can't go back. Not anymore." Weeks turned into months. Vanessa tried everything: calls, emails, messages through mutual friends, but Daniel remained firm. He was polite, never cruel, but unyielding. Slowly, the reality sank in. She hadn't just lost a husband, she had lost the only man who had ever loved her with full devotion, and this time there would be no second chance. Daniel focused on rebuilding his life. Work became more fulfilling, not because of Sophie or anyone else, but he was no longer drained by the constant ache of neglect. He started running again, reading late into the night, reconnecting with family he had drifted from. Little by little, he rediscovered himself, not as Vanessa's husband, not as someone fighting for scraps of affection, but as Daniel. One afternoon, months later, Daniel passed by the old house to collect some remaining belongings. Vanessa stood at the door, looking smaller somehow. She whispered, "If I had treated you right from the start, would you have stayed?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said gently, "Yes, but you didn't, and I can't live in the past." With that, he walked away for the last time. The chapter closed, not with anger, but with acceptance. Time didn't erase the scars, but it softened them. Daniel learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about reclaiming parts of himself that had been buried under years of loneliness and neglect. He began traveling, exploring places he had only dreamed of when his weekends were filled with waiting for Vanessa to return. He discovered joy in small rituals again, brewing coffee at sunrise, sketching in a quiet park, spending hours lost in books. And though he had grown closer to Sophie, he kept that connection slow and respectful. This wasn't about leaping into another relationship. This was about honoring his own worth first. For the first time in years, Daniel looked in the mirror and didn't see a man begging for love. He saw a man who finally respected himself enough to walk away. Vanessa's life, on the other hand, grew quieter. Friends she once prioritized slowly drifted away, busy with their own lives, their own marriages. The weekends that were once filled with trips and parties now stretched out long and empty. Every so often, she scrolled through old photos of her and Daniel, his arm around her, his smile so genuine it made her ache. She realized that she had been blind to the treasure she had in him. Regret became her constant companion. It wasn't just about losing Daniel, it was about realizing she had destroyed something irreplaceable with her own hands. Daniel and Vanessa's story wasn't just about betrayal or neglect, it was about choices, about love, about how love cannot survive without respect, about how devotion, no matter how deep, withers when it isn't reciprocated. Their marriage wasn't lost overnight, it slipped away, piece by piece. Every time when Vanessa dismissed Daniel's feelings, every time he silenced his pain to avoid conflict, until finally there was nothing left to salvage. In the end, Daniel didn't walk away because he stopped loving Vanessa. He walked away because he finally realized love without respect isn't love at all. It's endurance. And endurance isn't the foundation for a life together. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to stop fighting for someone who never fought for them. Common person perspective. So, what do we learn from Daniel and Vanessa's story? Many people will see themselves in it. whether as the partner who gives endlessly or the one who takes without realizing the damage they are causing. Relationships aren't about grand gestures, they are about consistency, about listening, about making your partner feel valued in the small, everyday moments. Neglect doesn't always show up as screaming matches or dramatic betrayals. Sometimes it's quieter. The unanswered calls, the weekends spent apart, the dismissive laughs when someone opens their heart. And often, by the time the neglect is recognized, it's too late. For those watching, the takeaway is clear. Don't wait until your partner is halfway out the door to start cherishing them. Don't wait for divorce papers to realize you should have listened sooner. Love is fragile, but respect is what makes it last. Because once a person decides they deserve better and finds the strength to walk away, no amount of regret can bring them back. Life isn't just about what happens, it's about how we reflect on it and what we take away as everyday people. If you connected with this story, give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories with real, common person perspectives.